So that's just something to keep in mind. I'm licensed in New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, and Pennsylvania, so I can do legal work usually across the United States, but I can also do single adoptions in New Jersey and New York as well. The most important part of your process really is not me or the agency you pick or the clinic you pick, believe it or not, but it's the surrogate you choose. So I like to answer the most basic questions. People always ask me, how long does it take to find a carrier? And that answer varies a lot. It could be almost instantly to up to 6 months. 6 months is kind of long, instantly is kind of short, obviously. But usually people who get carriers instantly have something unusual that nobody else wants. They want to reduce from 2 to 1, and I have a surrogate who will only carry 1 baby. They don't want to abort for Down syndrome, and I have 3 that don't want to abort, and no clients that want a carrier who won't abort. In general, if you're the typical person, you want somebody on the East Coast who has insurance that covers the delivery, that will abort. You're looking at a longer waiting period, not forever, but you may be taking a little longer to find a carrier. But to me, if you save $20,000 on health insurance and you had to wait an extra 8 to 10 weeks, that, you know, I always say to my, like when I picked a carrier for myself and I'm the owner, I waited because even though I could afford it, why did I want to spend $20,000 on health insurance when I didn't have to? But, so that's really up to you whether or not you want to make the process go quicker or what's more important to you, time or money. So it's not money to our office, we charge a flat fee. You'll never be charged more or less to get up on the list, so to speak. The carriers do choose you as well as you choosing them, but you choose them first. So we'll send you profiles, you'll pick the ones you want to talk to. If the carrier doesn't click with you, she could say no, but it won't be because you're same sex. So what happens on the profiles the applications that we get, we ask them, will you carry for a non-English speaking couple? Will you carry for a gay couple, a Jewish couple, an Asian couple, and that? So it's not just gay couple we're asking about every single thing. If one of the things they select is, I do not want to carry for a gay couple, obviously we don't call them up and say, gay people are nice too, why not? We just don't send them to you. So the same thing, like I always get a little twing when I see someone will carry for a Jewish couple because I'm Jewish, but I don't call them up and say, you know, Jews don't have horns, you could carry for them. So, you know, it really is a very personal thing. You have to get somebody that likes you. So whatever, like if you're Caucasian and you want your carrier to be Caucasian, that's fine, even though biologically it doesn't matter if she's African American or Mexican or so. The typical carrier is Caucasian and is from the Midwest. So I can tell you Jessica, who spoke, is a typical carrier in her feelings, but not in her eloquence of speaking. We did not choose her to speak. That was the center, even though she carried in our office 2 times. She is much more well-spoken than most carriers. That's probably why, I mean, she's not in her feelings and her niceness and her ability to carry and from a good family, but in terms of just being so well put together and being able to be so eloquent, don't just look for that, because not every person who could do a good job, you know, it doesn't mean that they have to speak that well. In fact, I always tell the center that it would be nice to have somebody on the panel as well that kind of represents the more typical way that they speak, which is none of them can. I have in my search engine, and this is not a joke, I spell surrogate wrong 15 times.
Yeah, me too.
Because on all the applications, they spell surrogate, S-E-A-R-G-E-A-T. I want to be a surrogate. So when I put it into Google, it actually gets me more applications because they're putting it. So, you know, don't discount them because they can't spell. You really just want them to have a healthy uterus and to be nice. And we test them all for drugs, alcohol, and nicotine. We do criminal background checks on all of them, home studies. And you're not getting them for their genes, so if they can't spell, it's fine. Obviously, they have to read, they have to write, and they have to have graduated. We don't take people who haven't graduated high school. But some people will come to me and say, I want someone who graduated college. And in general, but not for all of them, those tend to be the harder carriers to work with. Because think about it, if you're well educated, you look at the back of your medicine label and you ask 500 questions. So they're the ones who, when I give them progesterone or Lupron that they have to take, want to know every single possible side effect of this medication. Where the person who married her high school sweetheart in Georgia doesn't ask all those questions. Sometimes it's better to be simple. I always think that those people will live to be 100 because they don't worry about anything. Everything is going to just work out to be fun. So carry the pregnancy well. So if you have any questions, I will also be emailing out costs, but I always tell people, like our agency fee, the first fee is I think $5,500 and the second is $7,000. It's about $13,000 and change. The process itself is probably $80 to $90 if you do everything with us. It could be as low as $60 if you do some stuff on your own, but I do have a spreadsheet that you can see everything that you're paying. Obviously, the biggest variable in the process for cost is the IVF. So if you keep doing IVF cycles that don't result in any eggs, then if you didn't buy the money back guarantee program, you're going to keep paying for it. But I will tell you that most gay couples do not have the problems that Art had with, I never heard, I mean, I know that he had 7 egg donors because I lived through those 7 egg donors with him, but that is probably the most I have ever seen ever. Most people, 1 egg donor, they're fine. So most people do have 1 bump or 2, but usually it's not that bad.
This question's not so much about your service, but what you've noticed. So with the gay couples that you've worked with over the years, what's the variability in terms of like the commitment levels of both people in it? Like, are they both 100% on, or is there one that's more leading it than the other?
Well, the one big difference that I find with same-sex couples versus other people is that sometimes it's very hard to decide who's going to give the sperm. So it's not as much the commitment, although I see that equally with the heterosexual couples. People get divorced and break up. That's not specific to any sort of sexual orientation. But it is sometimes hard to choose who's going to go first, so to speak. And sometimes, like, what you can do is you can fertilize half the eggs with one partner's sperm and fertilize half the eggs with the other, but then if only one takes, sometimes they don't know whose it is, and there can be some anxiety surrounding that aspect. So actually, I had a couple, and the state in which they had the baby born mandated DNA testing, and they did have twins. They put into one of each, but they didn't want to know which was whose. So actually, only I got the DNA results because they were afraid that their respective in-laws wouldn't be as nice to the kids if they found out, although they look very different, each of them. So I don't know exactly if that would plan out, but you know, so sometimes those kind of aspects you have to sort of work through that. Like, in my opinion, it's fine to put in one of each, but if one of you is going to be so disappointed, it might be better to like do that one at a time. But I don't have a preference in terms of like what you do, just so that you, when the baby comes, I want you to be happy that you're having a baby and not having anxiety over whose biological baby it is, because like our goal is for you to have a healthy baby regardless of whose genes. So those kinds of issues between couples are good to talk about, just so that you're not, and to make sort of a plan, like, okay, if it turns out that it's your DNA, then we'll have another one. And most of the time, we're actually the only agency that if you use your carrier again, we actually don't charge you an agency fee. Most of the ones here will charge you to use your carrier again. We do charge you for the legal work again. So it's not completely free, because the legal work does have to be repeated. But when you are using the same carrier, I really don't have to do all that much work with you and your relationship, because hopefully if you're using the same person again, it's because you like each other. So you won't be charged. So a lot of people do what's called the sibling project. And I always tell people though, please do not ask her in the delivery room if she wants to do it again. We have to give her a little break. But you should tell us if you want to use her again, because if she applies to our agency, we generally respect her privacy and don't call you to tell her. So if you want us to hold her for you, you do have to let us know.
Did
5 minutes, or you have a question? Okay.
did you imply that during the matching process, do you offer more than one surrogate choice?
Not usually. That's very rare.
Yeah.
Because it's not because we don't want to, it's usually because, to be honest, we don't have them. So the only time you would get 2, because it's not like if we send you a profile, no other client is looking at it, because we don't want 2 people to say they want that person. But let's just say you were willing to pay for that expensive insurance, and we had 2 people, then we would send them to you. Or you didn't want to abort, you might get 3 people at the same time. But in general, that's very rare, so I wouldn't want you to think that that's going to happen. Because it's unusual for us to have any surplus of people that have the common things, so that are close with insurance who will abort. We never are going to have a surplus of those, but we'll have a surplus of qualities that people don't want necessarily. That doesn't make them bad carriers, so I might have 20 who won't abort for Downs. Not make them a bad carrier, but not a good candidate for most people.
explain a little bit about the health insurance piece again? Like,
Sure. So most people that have health insurance, it covers their pregnancy, right? Because of things like Elton John, Sarah Jessica Parker, the new normal, insurance companies are getting wise. So they no longer are covering pregnancies in which there is a preconception intent not to keep the baby. Okay, so that's going to be any surrogate, right? So if they find out she's a surrogate and there's an exclusion, what they do is a take back and they make you pay for the whole pregnancy. Now, that's probably not the end of the world if it's an easy pregnancy. Like my daughter's bills were $3,500 because she had a perfect pregnancy in a rural area of the country. But a very high-risk twin pregnancy could cost $200,000. So it's not a risk you want to take if she has that policy. You better believe if your carrier has a $3,500 pregnancy, they're not going to care. They're going to let it go. But if she has a $250,000 pregnancy, they're going to exercise their legal right to take it back if they find out. They usually find out at delivery when the carrier's name isn't placed on the birth certificate. And they don't get that dependent being added to the policy. So if you have that issue in the pregnancy, they're going to do what's called a take back, and then you have to go to a Lloyd's of London syndicate to buy health insurance when she's pregnant, and that could cost you as much as $25,000. So if you're willing to pay that $25,000 up front, most people are not. So you would get a carrier quicker because I would have more that had an exclusion. That would, even though they had good insurance, I wouldn't feel safe using it because it has an exclusion. Does that make sense?
It does, because we heard in some other session, like Texas, being a place that it does not have the exclusion.
Yeah, Texas doesn't usually have the exclusion. It also has a lot of options where you could buy, but it is not the best place for gay couples. You know, I mean, you can get a carrier in Texas and get a sole parent order and then do an adoption, but if there was any sort of fight in between you as a couple, they're not going to honor that in Texas, because Texas does not, or in fact, the surrogacy statute specifically does not apply to gay couples in Texas. So we can get you a carrier there, but if you have any marital problems, which statistically is more likely than you have a problem with a surrogate, and that has nothing to do with the sexual orientation, just that 50% of couples split up, you're going to have a legal problem in Texas.
And are there just the states that are better for doing all of this?
Well, there are states that are better for gay couples, like Massachusetts, Arkansas, California, Rhode Island. Illinois is better, and Illinois doesn't usually have an exclusion, although most Blue Cross policies in Illinois do. So you kind of really have to know I've been doing it so long that most of the time I can know the policy off the top of my head, but I still like to look at it. Because I was actually just in the last session saying that Blue Cross Blue Shield of Pennsylvania just added an exclusion effective September 1. So, you know, you just never know when it's going to pop up.